Hey. Oh, am I on? Can you hear this? Can you, you can hear me on? Yeah, I'm gonna make a sandwich. Actually, we are gonna make a sandwich. I haven't been here on a Wednesday in 4 months, so I'm glad to be here. It's all because of work travel and stuff, but I've missed like every core, every Bible study, just because it just seems I've had to travel every time. So I'm really happy to be here. I am feeling a little under the weather, so like I'll try to cover my mic if I cough, but you can still hear that, right? Like I'm directly covering it. So uh, let me revise that statement. I'm probably going to cough, so deal with it. Okay. Does that feel okay? All right. Um, I've thought that the last several weeks has been some really really good teaching here. Not because I was part of it, but talking about moving forward like 3 weeks ago, and then what Mark talked about past tense really was nailing home the point of how you actually move forward. I thought it was really really great and inspired for me how it built. And I was just thinking about like it being Thanksgiving is very timely because I don't think that you're able to move forward or you're able to understand the whole past tense kind of concept that Mark was talking about unless you really have a spirit of Thanksgiving. And we could go through like 100 Bible verses that focus on Thanksgiving. We're not going to do that tonight, but we're going to talk about another because God has just kind of brought me to thinking about what joy is. And I think God has brought me to thinking about what joy is because Chuck has been talking about joy all year. I mean, maybe not to you, but like to me. Hi, Kinsey. How you doing? She's so cute. Like if a little beautiful child waves at you, you have to stop everything you're doing and wave. Like, and I think joy is really misunderstood. I think we use it for our own purposes when it's actually meant to do a lot more for you than you would think. So let's start this off by you doing most of the work before I do any work. I really actually don't have a lot of answers, but I have a lot of thoughts. So I'll give you a bunch of my thoughts that has come from me kind of like studying. So I hope you're not coming here thinking like I have the definitive teaching on joy because that's not what this is. Okay. So I'll ask you what is joy? What is joy? And that mic is right there, and I think there's another mic somewhere around here. But what is joy? I'll give this side of the room that. This is your interactive time. That's not. Yeah, it is. You're the moderator of this, the controller of all sound right now. Anyone? Don't be shy.
I can hold it for the person who does.
Chuck, go ahead and start us off. I'm going to call on you.
Joy. Sounds like a trick question, but I know people like to separate joy and happiness. I don't like to do that too awful much. I do. It's funny because as I was driving here, I thought if I was just randomly asked to speak tonight, what would I want to talk about? And I thought joy, I think, is what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So it's sort of funny now you asked me to define it. Yeah, I think it has a deeper meaning than happiness, but I think if we never have happiness, I don't know that we truly have we're internally joyful. So I do equate it to a feeling.
Okay.
But but deeper than that, it's also a knowing. I think it goes back to identity as well. I just knowing who I am helps me get through circumstances. That hopefully there's some underlying joy. I think to try to hide like bad times and say like, oh, I'm just joyful in the trial, and I know Paul talks a lot about that. But if that's where you live all the time,
Yeah. We're gonna talk a little bit about that.
yeah.
So, joy and happiness. You're saying it's deeper than happiness, but it's definitely manifested in happiness. Like, is joy? Is that what you're saying? There's no right.
Yeah,
wrong
as
answer.
I'm discovering it, I think so. And why it's such a big thing to me is I think God wants us to be joyful and happy. Like, I think the overall grand part of life as he designed it was we should be in a state of joy and happiness. And I think it does manifest in like a good feeling. Like I enjoy life. Like it's I enjoy what I'm doing, being here. So I guess to me that's why it's important.
Okay. The question is, what is joy? And I want opinions and thoughts. So.
It's a choice.
Oh, joy is a choice. Why is it a choice?
Like, even if you might not feel joyful, you can choose to be joyful. And I think, I don't know, I often pair joyful with thankfulness too.
So it's a feeling, but beyond a feeling. So it's equated to equals thankfulness. I think there is a very important component of Thanksgiving that cannot be divorced from joy. Those things can't. Like, if you're not a thankful person, you're probably not going to experience joy in your life, right? I mean, that's like an obvious statement. If you're a whiner, sorry, no. Well, if you are, you're probably not going to experience joy. We're going to get a little more into that. Anybody else? What is joy? Go ahead, Casey.
Well, if the joy of the Lord is our strength, then I guess it would be strength then.
I'm glad you brought that verse up. I think so many times we try to become strong so that we can have joy, and that is kind of the opposite thing that we're supposed to be doing. Like, the joy of the Lord is our strength, but we try to be strong, and then from strength we experience joy, and it's really backwards. Which is why we don't get there, right? Carts and horses, and we're putting carts in front of horses, and next thing you know, you have broken carts and broken horses. So, what else? Anyone? Yeah.
I think this goes back to grounded identity, but like joy is not situational; it's a state of being. So, because of some of the verses that talks about, count it all joy, and you're going through persecution, but be joyful and all that stuff. You would. So it's not a state of being. It's not where you're maybe currently at, or where people would think joy would be sourced out of. It's sourced out of a person, not a situation.
Okay.
I don't think this is a summary statement, but I keep thinking about how joy is like the absence of an emotional turmoiled state inside. Like you're not subject to a lot of negative, or maybe you're immune. Your identity and your connection with the Spirit of the Father is immune to sort of emotional storm or roller coaster. You know what I'm trying to sum up here, but yeah.
I've always equated that to peace, but I see where you can, no peace, no joy, kind of thing. Anyone else? Okay. So I actually want to focus on this because I think that joy actually takes into account every single situation that you have. Like, we like to say that joy does not, like, it's not about your circumstances. You can be joyful in any circumstance, but I think the consideration of your circumstance is more of the biblical perception of what joy actually turns out to be. There's a greater joy that actually takes into account your circumstance. Like really, like, I acknowledge this. And I think too many people, in order to say that they're in a joyful state, don't recognize the circumstance that they're in because, well, we need to be joyful. How many people here, let's be honest, how many people here have tried to solve a problem by ignoring it? I have. How many people have actually successfully solved a problem by ignoring it? No, what you did was you increased your comfort, right? You increased your ability to deal. You increased, like I just took medicine right now because I'm coughing a lot. I didn't cure anything. I just increased my ability to be comfortable. But it didn't fix anything. I can still feel it, like in the back of my throat. Like I just want to cough so bad right now, guys. And I'm just, hold on. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So when thinking about joy, I think of Ecclesiastes because, of course, you have to think of Ecclesiastes when you're thinking of joy. That's the first place you should go, I think. That's sarcastic, guys. Let's go to Ecclesiastes 3. Ecclesiastes. I can never say Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Ecclesiastes.
So close.
Ecclesiastes. Usually when you're up here, you should be able to pronounce like some of the words. That's why I love the Message. No. None of those hard ones. Okay. So there is an appointed time for everything. And there's a time in every event under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to shun embracing. A time to search and a time to give up as lost. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear apart and a time to sew together. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love. This is going to be the hard one for us. Ready? You ready for this one? A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Now, just taken as a standalone section of Scripture, if you looked at that, you would consider that what's happening is they're listing opposites, right? Is that, like, we get taught very young to look at things in opposites. Cold, warm, dark, light, all these things that we get taught. Oh, these are opposites. They work against each other, okay? And all these things, if you look at it from Ecclesiastes 3, did I say it right that time? Thank you, hon. You can get there. Now the problem with that is if you look at it just from that perspective, you start swinging in your emotions. And what do you want? Which side do you want to be on? Which side do you want to be on? No, be honest. Oh, the happy side. Exactly. So now what we do is we take this side here. That says kill. That's the happy side, I guess. I'm not sure.
I'm happy.
You're happy about it. Hunting season. Get it. Time to. But we actually, what we do, and I won't even take what a happy side is, but we split these two things in the middle, these two lists here. And now we separate them, and one is the happy side, and one is what? The sad side. So then what we try to do is, if I really want to, if I wanted to pick, what I'm going to do is I want this, and I'm going to avoid this. I want this. I want this. Sorry. I want to avoid that. Oh, you know what? I want this. I want to avoid this. I want this. Right? Do we do that in our life? Okay. All right. Now, the problem is that when you're only reading it from that perspective, you're missing out on what the balance of life is supposed to look like. Okay? So if I can take this portion of Scripture and read it from a 2 Corinthians 4:15 through 16 or through 18 perspective, now it gives me a better understanding of why all these things actually need to exist and work together. So let's go to 2 Corinthians 4:15 through 18. I got a new Bible. I'm very excited. So I'm going to read from that new Bible. Let's see here. 2 Corinthians 4:16. I'm actually going to start in 15 through 18. All right. Yes, all things work for your enrichment. This is the Passion Translation, so you're not going to just follow along. It's actually a little longer. Yes, all things work for your enrichment, so that more of God's marvelous grace will spread to more and more people, resulting in an even greater increase of praise to God, bringing him even more glory. So no wonder we don't give up. For even though our outer person gradually wears out, our inner being is renewed every single day. We view our slight, short-lived troubles in the light of eternity. That's an important phrase. We're going to get back to that. We view our slight, short-lived troubles in the light of eternity. And we see our difficulties as the substance that produces for us an eternal, weighty glory far beyond all comparison. Now, if I can take Ecclesiastes 3 and read it through a 2 Corinthians 4 perspective, now what I can do is I can take birth and death together and understand it in a proper context. Like a whole context. Like more of a complete context. Because I can't really understand birth without understanding death. He even says that you can't understand Jesus' death without understanding his life. And if you can't understand his life without understanding his death. Okay? You can't separate these two things. So when we do this, when we separate the weeping and the laughing, or the mourning and the dancing and the throwing stones, when we separate the love and hate like that, and say, oh, I only want to operate on this side, then what happens to our overall perspective? So I'll give it, because I know the love portion would be a hard one to deal with. But I'll tell you right now, if you truly want to love something, you're going to have to hate some things. I'll give you an example. If you want to love people, you better hate injustice. Right? Like, is that? You're going to have to. Because if you want to invest in people to the depths of love, you're going to have to then also invest in the things that prevent those people from rising up. You have to hate it. I feel that way. That's my perspective. Okay? If that's Mark's perspective, I guess this is my perspective over on this side. But in order to have a proper context, have a proper context, you need to understand the laughing in conjunction with the weeping. There does have to be a time where there's weeping and where there's laughing. If you're always laughing, there's something wrong. If you're always weeping, there's something wrong. So I'm actually taking a different definition of what joy is, because I think joy truly does take into account the circumstances that we're in. And what I think joy is joy is a mature son's ability to put into right perspective circumstance. That's what I think joy is. I think it manifests through a feeling. I think it actually can manifest through the feeling of weeping. Like if you're mourning something, you're actually celebrating that life through a way that looks to be sad. I don't know if we could just say sad is not being joyful. I think you could actually connect your feelings, even in mourning, to celebrating something that you thought was really important. It's hard to grasp. It's hard to really like say, oh, you know what? I'll tell you one thing. All right. Because we put so many things to our feelings, if it doesn't feel good, it almost is like, well, that can't be joy. But if I put in perspective my mourning for someone in the realm of eternity, I know that I've invested into someone. I've invested. And that mourning now shows me how much I invested. If somebody close to me passed away and I showed no mourning, do you think I invested anything in them? No. No. So it manifests in that way. It actually manifests in a way that you're like, wow, that person is weeping. That person is mourning. So it can actually be a component of joy because it's put in proper perspective. I'm sorry. So I really want to talk about how Jesus handled joy. I want to use the example of Jesus because our circumstances are a really big component of what joy is overall. Okay, so let's go with James 1 first. Oh, and like any Bible study, like comments, questions, or at any time, please. So,
Yeah, I'll add in there then since you opened that up. When you brought up the word eternity, it did make me think something I've really been focusing on. I think I've mentioned that word here before, but I don't know that we can have true joy without having an eternal perspective. So I don't know what that means to each person, but for me, it's, you said perspective, it's that like long-term part of life to me.
Yeah.
So if I don't have an eternal perspective, then a situation I'm in might seem hopeless or helpless or not be able to have joy in that situation. Again, I still tie probably a little more to feeling than you are, so I'm anxious to go through this.
I understand that, and I'm just telling you what my perspective is.
Yeah, but I do agree, like, it's because of the joy, like the joy set before him, the joy of life set before me, the eternal hope I have.
Yeah,
that
we're going to actually get to that verse.
Yeah.
I think if we deal with our circumstances from a very temporal standpoint, like this is my time, then it's going to be very difficult for you to actually obtain joy. But that's why this portion of Scripture, like written this way, within the perspective of eternity. If you put your current circumstance within the perspective of eternity, now we're talking about a different ballgame. All right. So, okay, let's go to First James. No, there's only one. James 1. James 1. I'm going to turn this around. Let's say goodbye to Ecclesiastes for the rest of tonight. We're going to start in verse 2. Okay. My fellow believers, when it seems as though you are facing nothing but difficulties, see it as an invaluable opportunity to experience the greatest joy that you can. For you know that when your faith is tested, it stirs up power within you to endure all things. And then, as your endurance grows even stronger, it will release perfection into every part of your being until there is nothing missing and nothing of lack. So, in this perspective, like from an eternity perspective, what's the perspective that we should have here in this verse? As your endurance grows even stronger, it will release perfection. So the actual context of this is a perfection. It's perfection. All right? And what releases perfection is your ability to what? Persevere through this slight time. All right? Your ability to persevere gains power for you to endure, and once you endure, you are able to endure more, and as you endure, perfection. And lacking goes out the window. Okay? So within this context, if I'm just looking at my trial, right, through this temporal time, I'm going through this right now, but I'm not putting it in the context of perfection, then me going through this trial seems pretty futile. It feels like an impossible task. It's because I'm not approaching it from a joyful perspective, which is putting this thing in the proper perspective of perfection. So I should have perfection as my umbrella, right? In this verse. Perfection is my umbrella, right? And endurance is the thing that actually helps release. But my perception is for perfection. It's not just, hey, I have to go through this thing. I'm moving towards perfection. I can't do it the other way. All right? If I do it the other way, then I'm only going to focus on the thing that I'm enduring. And that's why people don't have any joy in the thing that they're enduring, because it's not within the concept or the perspective of the bigger thing. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Let's go to Romans 8. We know this one. We know this one really well. Romans 8:18. All right. You there? I'll give you a second. Okay. I am convinced that any suffering we endure is less than nothing compared to the magnitude of glory that is about to be unveiled within us. The entire universe is standing on tiptoes, yearning to see the unveiling of God's glorious sons and daughters. For against its will, the universe itself had to endure the empty futility resulting from the consequences of human sin. But now, with eager expectation, all creation longs for the freedom from its slavery to decay and to experience with us the wonderful freedom coming to God's children. So, what's the actual perspective that we should be taking with this? The actual perspective is glory, right? So the big thing is glory, right? And if we're viewing things, or if we're viewing those, like it says here, I'm convinced that any suffering we endure is less than nothing compared to what? The magnitude of glory. Now I can endure the suffering, because I need to be able to compare it to something, okay? So if I compare my suffering to the glory, am I able to endure the suffering? Yes. And too many times what we do is we focus on the suffering because we think, okay, well, this suffering is going to get me to glory, but we're not actually putting it within the greater perspective. Glory, okay? The glory of the Father. That's the that's the perspective that we should be having. Okay, that's the context. The context really isn't your suffering. The context is the glory of the Father. All right? The thing that you need to be able to do is compare your suffering to what? To His glory. And when you're able to compare your suffering to His glory, what happens to your suffering? It's small. Now you're able to operate in joy. Yeah. So joy, once again, is being able to put into proper perspective your circumstance compared to the larger context. So the larger context is perfection. The larger context is His glory. It's not your suffering. Okay, that is not that's not, those are the trees within the forest. Okay? So this is the verse that I really want to stay on for a little bit. And this is the one that Chuck actually just mentioned. And it's Hebrews 12. The last verse was Romans 8:18. And you probably know it more from the NASB, which is what all creation is growing for the revealing of the sons, right? It's that verse in a different translation. Okay, so how did Jesus go about this? And it's actually within Hebrews 12. Unto Jesus, who birthed faith within us and leads us forward into faith's what? Perfection. So what's the context? Perfection. His example is this. And I just think the way it's worded here is so cool. Because his heart was focused on the joy of knowing that you would be his, he endured the agony of the cross and conquered its humiliation, and now sits exalted at the right hand of the throne of God. Okay, so this is the problem with how we look at this verse, okay? Because we look at things very linearly, okay? So we look at this is where you are right now, okay? This is what you need to endure, and this is a future joy that you have here. I don't think it's supposed to be read linear like this. Like you're here, and you need to get to here. Because how do you ever get there? And I think what happens with most people is they're here, and they kind of die around. Because his heart was focused on the joy of knowing that you would be his. Because his heart was focused on the joy of knowing that you would be his. So here, the thing that's actually manifested is the joy of you being his. And over here is a joy knowing that that's going to happen. Does that make sense? So what you need in order to actually make this thing happen in your life is you need to have a joy here, and there needs to be a joy here. Okay? We can't have a lack and an absence of joy here and actually think that we'll be able to maintain or sustain the endurance that you have to go through in order to get to this joy here. That's at some point, I put anything in your life. Like think about anything in your life. And for most of the time, like we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? But do you ever go into a tunnel without holding a light? Like think about that. You go into a tunnel and you're hoping that you'll see light at the end of the tunnel. But what moron doesn't go into a dark place without a light? Yeah.
Not that moron, but
Sure.
So I like your analogy about the tunnel. For me, the light is not for the end of the tunnel because there is light at the end of the tunnel. The light's for in the middle of it.
That's exactly.
So for me, that word joy should be written over your line.
You're getting farther than.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, but you're fine. You're fine. That's fine. That's fine.
I'm being yelled at by my family, so I'm going to shut up now.
No, go on with your, it doesn't matter who says it. It just matters that it's said. Go ahead and say what you're going to say.
I don't know if I want to get yelled at more.
I release you from there. Is it dawn? I can't release you from dawn. Just go ahead and say what you're going to say.
All I was going to say was, I go back to James 1. Consider it all joy.
Consider it all joy.
Which means that Jesus, while he was hanging, felt that joy. He was in joy while he was being crucified.
While he was suffering.
Yeah.
And why? Because of a knowing, going back to what you said earlier, Chuck, there was a knowing of you being his. But that's exactly where we're going. Because when it comes down, like I said before, you can't get through any of this without actually having